What's up, guys? Welcome to Daily Dose of Reddit. This is your host, Zach, and today's subreddit is r/ProRevenge. This story's called, Got My Freshman Dorm Leader Fired a Year After He Called the Cops on Me. I've never really posted anything before, but I have a funny revenge karma story that my friends have always enjoyed. I first got to college my freshman year and met the dorm leader, or residential advisor in most schools. Like most colleges, the dorm leader was the upperclassman that lived in the dorms and monitored the freshman halls. My dorm leader's name was Julio. Fake name, by the way, and at first, he seemed like a nice dude that minded his own business. He talked about how he would stay out of everyone's business if we would stay out of his. Also, he tried to be the cool dorm leader, and always mentioned to me about how he drank tons of alcohol his freshman year in the dorms. He gave off the impression he really didn't care if we ever drank in our dorm rooms, but to just keep it on the low if we did. I really didn't drink much at all, but I appreciated the fact that he seemed pretty normal and didn't try to rat on kids. During the last week of October of my freshman year of college, I had one of the hardest weeks of my academic career. I was a biochemistry major taking some pretty tough classes and had 3 exams that week. At the end of the week, a friend I had recently made down the hall invited me to his dorm room to watch an upcoming NBA game. As we were watching the game, he had a bottle of vodka and gave some to the guys in the dorm. Being a naive and stupid freshman kid just trying to make some friends, I took 1 shot of vodka and continued to watch the game. As we were watching the game, one of the guys in the dorm spills a bottle of soda and rushes to the bathroom to grab some paper towels. He walks out of the dorm room. Julio walked by and noticed the bottle of vodka. He laughed and said something of the sorts of, "I remember when I was a freshman, haha, just try and keep it down." We thanked him and told him to have a good night. It seemed like a normal conversation and nothing out of the ordinary. 30 minutes later, we heard a knock on the door and 2 policemen showed up with breathalyzers. They told us they had received a complaint from Julio about underage drinking and a party being thrown in the dorm room. Remember, it was 3 guys watching a Lakers game on a Thursday night at 8 p.m. I ended up getting a minor in consumption card for blowing a .02, had to do 20 hours community service, a reflection journal, and appear to the Judicial Affairs Center at my college about my supposed drinking problem. I'm not blaming the officer for giving me a ticket, but I was pretty upset that Julio, who always talked about getting poo-faced freshman year in the dorm, called the police right after he essentially gave us the okay for the night. A few weeks later, I see Julio and straight up asked him why he decided to rat me out. Specifically, I asked why he didn't just tell me to head back to my dorm if he had a problem with the alcohol, instead of calling the police right after our conversation. He responds word for word, "You made a decision and had to suffer the consequences of that decision." After that incident, I never really talked to him, but he always tried to be buddy-buddy when he saw me in the hallway. Anyway, I eventually leave the dorms and move off campus for my sophomore year. I had decided to rush a fraternity my freshman year and ended up meeting some really nice guys. I have never been the fraternity type, but I went to a smaller college where fraternities are a lot different than most places. During the 2nd semester of my sophomore year, my fraternity was taking a new pledge class. One day, I received a text from Julio saying, "One of the guys pledging your fraternity has been caught dealing alcohol to another freshman in the dorms. I thought I would let you know." Turns out, Julio was the dorm leader for a freshman pledging my fraternity and ratted him out to Judicial Affairs as well. Thinking the term dealing alcohol was the lamest, funniest thing I have ever heard, I sent that to our fraternity GroupMe and everyone laughed about it. About a week later, that kid pledging our fraternity came up to me asking about the message I received from Julio. Essentially, a pretty similar thing happened to him like what happened to me. Julio found out he had given another kid in the dorm a bottle of wine and reported it to the police. This kid ended up getting a minor in possession and had to speak with Judicial Affairs. This is where the story gets hilarious. In his meeting with Judicial Affairs, the kid pledging our fraternity told the Judicial Affairs guy that his dorm leader, Julio was now a senior at this point, had texted me about the charges pending against him. Apparently, it's a huge violation to discuss pending charges against a freshman in your dorm to a third party. The Judicial Affairs guy told him that if he could prove Julio was discussing this charge with a third party, aka me, he would receive severe sanctions. Basically, if I sent that text to the Judicial Affairs people, Julio would be in a crap load of trouble. So, I sent the text that night to the Judicial Affairs people. After that, I didn't hear anything about what happened to Julio and had honestly forgotten about it. However, nearing the end of the school year in my sophomore year, I saw Julio at the dining hall and he came up to speak to me. He tells me a story about how he knows I was the one that ratted him to the Judicial Affairs, how he ended up getting fired from his dorm leader position, lost the scholarship money his dorm leader job provided him, and overall how crappy his life has been since he got fired. After going through his entire sob story, he asked me, "Why did you do that? This could have been handled completely differently. I didn't have to get fired and I could have kept my scholarship money." I look him dead in the eye for what seemed like 30 seconds and say, "Julio, you made a decision and had to suffer the consequences of that decision." Dun dun dun! Wow. He used his own words against him. That's some good stuff. I absolutely love doing that. It adds a beautiful dramatic flair to anything, and people should do it more often. It's completely underutilized because it makes people look like chumps and makes you look like a badass. Because what are they gonna do? Criticize something they said? Oh. Okay, this one's called Redneck Thinks It's Funny to Yank Out Mailboxes. My dad makes him pay. Disclaimer, this happened a long time ago, but still makes me giggle to this day. That's cute. So way back in the day, mid-90s or so, my family lived in a log cabin on 10 acres of land in a rural area, 10 minutes or so outside of town. It wasn't totally the sticks, but you could definitely hear banjo music in the background sometimes. At the end of our nearly quarter-mile-long driveway was one of those roads that was also technically a state highway. In the AM, I'd trudge down to wait for the bus. When I got home, I'd grab the mail and carry it back. Until one Monday morning when I went out and noticed the mailbox was gone. On closer inspection, it looked like it had just been ripped out of the ground. Dad was obviously not pleased. He went to talk to the county sheriff who happened to live a mile down the road. Turns out it had been happening up and down the road for months. Someone was tossing a chain over mailboxes and yanking them out with their vehicle. He suspected a guy down the road with his great big lifted four-wheel drive truck, but couldn't prove anything. Usually happened on Saturday and Sunday nights, with people finding out in the morning. Also seems the nicer the mailbox, the bigger a target, and many had been hit multiple times. People had tried digging deeper, using more durable wood, etc. The guy just took it as a challenge and ripped them out again. Soft, sandy ground, and his truck was a monster. Well, Dad said, "Challenge freaking accepted!" A bit about my father. He's a steel worker with an engineering background and graduate degree. Built like a bear with forearms the size of my freaking legs. Most people look at him and would never think this monster of a man is also brilliant, but he is. The calm, cool type that almost never loses his temper. But wrong him, and God help you. So Dad goes to Lowe's and buys the fanciest, prettiest mailbox they sell. He then proceeds to install it on top of an 8-foot-long cylinder of 3-inch diameter hardened tool steel. But he wasn't done there. After digging down with post holers and dropping it in, he then filled it in with quick-set concrete. To really sell it, he then used some strips of 1/2-inch wood to cover the steel core of his now indestructible mailbox of doom. primed and painted them so it looked like a standard 4-inch post, and even had my mom decorate it with flowers and such. He wanted it to be as tempting of a target as possible. Didn't even take a week. I went out for school in the morning and found the mailbox right where it should be. Attached to it was 30 feet of chain and an entire hitch assembly, ripped right off the truck's frame, sheared the bolts. It was marvelous to behold. Sheriff gets called over, dies laughing when he sees it. He went to the house of the guy that was suspected, and sure enough, verified the damage to his truck matched. Fun fact, messing with a mailbox is a federal crime, as in you go to federal prison, not those cushy state places. Dad was unofficially rewarded by the sheriff's department with a few cases of beer and some venison. And after that, every deputy in town would flash him a thumbs up whenever they saw him. Edit. Apparently, vandalism to mailboxes is far more common than I thought, and other people have taken similar measures. I guess great minds think alike. Edit 2. As many have commented, federal prison is actually a lot better than state. Didn't know that, sorry. You know what? Good on you for keeping the original post the same, despite some errors that were brought to your attention. I think that's very honorable. But yeah, that sounds like a cool dad. And to be rewarded from your sheriff with beer and venison? Hell yeah! I mean, beer is just kind of gross to me. It just tastes like weedy, carbonated water. But venison is good. I remember the first time I had it in 4th grade. This one kid, his name was River. He brought some deer jerky with him, and he gave me some, and that was some good stuff. But yeah, don't steal people's mailboxes. That's just annoying, dude. Alright, this story's called For Everyone That Yells Free Bird at Concerts. You know who you are. One of you is at every goddamn show. I used to tour with a band, and we had around 200 concerts a year. At least 200 times a year, someone would yell, "Free Bird!" and laugh like they said something clever. I don't understand why it's funny, and hearing it every day for thousands of shows, still not that funny. So one day we tried to find out the deal. When the Freebird guy of the day yelled, we invited him on stage to answer a few questions. Why do you yell Freebird? Because it's funny! Why is that funny? Okay, so we didn't get any answers, but we certainly came up with one. Nobody comes up with ridiculous ideas like a group of 20-somethings who spend 15 hours a day in a van together. First thing we had to do was buy a sampler. This is a small piece of equipment that you can pre-program with any sounds you want and press buttons to trigger them. They are pretty expensive. The one we bought for the prank was $1,200. Side note, we were staying all 5 members to a single hotel room every night and eating nothing but dollar menu garbage and ramen because even if your band is doing good, you're still broke. I just want you to understand how ridiculous it was for us to spend $1,000 on this. As far as I'm concerned, it was worth it 10 times over. The next thing we needed was a folding table with chairs for all of us, some teacups, and a newspaper or 2. We would set these up next to the stage and no one would even notice it was there. So we found a 16-minute long version of Freebird and loaded it onto the sampler. The trap was set. Sure enough, someone yelled, "Freebird!" at the next show. This time, our lead singer acted really interested. "What'd you say? Freebird? Do you want to hear Freebird?" The audience cheers loudly. "So, just to be clear, you want us to stop playing our set and instead play Freebird?" They cheer again in approval. And now, the Freebird guy clearly looks like he's never been so proud of anything he's ever done in his life. We all stepped to the center of the stage in a very serious-looking huddle. We made it to a point to go comically long discussing Freebird, and sometimes we would just talk about movies we liked for a while or make fun of each other's sisters. When we felt like it had gone on long enough, and we were terrible at making jokes go way too long, we all nodded and made it clear that we had just agreed to play Freebird. "All right, folks, you asked for it. You've got it. Freebird!" While the crowd went absolutely nuts, the singer went to the sampler and, like an old man fumbling to use a remote, he found the button and pressed it as anticlimactically as possible. Freebird begins to play, and we all put our instruments down and sit around the table. We sip on pretend tea and browse the newspaper quietly. At first, everyone thought it was hilarious, but after a few minutes, they started to revolt, chanting for us to come back and all. We look at each other in a very confused manner and shrug it off a few times before the singer would finally go back to the mic. "What's wrong? You don't want to listen to this anymore? No! You want us to play our stuff again? Yeah! Well, what about that guy who yelled Freebird? That guy sucks!" And then the booing would start for that poor Freebird guy. We did this for an entire tour, and it absolutely never got old. I'd like to think that after that year, tens of thousands of people stopped yelling Freebird at every show they go to. At least for me, that makes the world a slightly better place. Oh, that sounds really annoying. It's kind of like how every single YouTube comment section has people saying, first, 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 even if it's like the 20th comment. Now, I get it, you want to be the first comment for whatever freaking reason, but here's the thing. Literally no one goes to a YouTube comment section and thinks, wow, that guy's lucky. He got the first comment. The way these guys handled it is some next level trolling. I would 100% do something like that if people cared to come to a live performance done by me. I'm sure people would go to a live performance, but I just don't have anything to perform live. Unless Jack Black and Kyle Gass wanted to perform Beelzebub with me and I get to play Satan, because I'm honestly really good at Dave Grohl's vocals and I could probably replace him, just saying. Not that I'm gonna, but you better watch it, Dave. Alright, this story's called The Case of the Missing Firewood. This may be pushing Rule 6 a little, but this happened when my grandfather was growing up in rural Kansas in the 40s and 50s, and is one of my favorite stories from him. Story: when my grandpa was growing up, he didn't have electricity, this being rural Kansas. What they did have was a wood-burning stove. At one point, firewood that great-grandfather had been storing began to disappear. A thief was afoot. I thought it was a leg, bro. My great-grandfather, getting tired of the firewood disappearing, hatches a plan. Great-grandfather takes some of the logs and drills them out, leaving a cavity. He then puts some gunpowder in the cavities and plugs the holes to hide his handiwork. That night, he tells my grandpa that he would bring in the firewood. Of course he knows what logs he's messed with. Now, this is the funny part, and I wish I knew how embellished it was, but stranger things have happened. The next day, great-grandfather is walking into town and comes across a gentleman also headed into town, and they get to talking. It turns out the gentleman is going into town to make a purchase. The item he seeks? A new stove. He says to my great-grandfather, "I don't know what they're putting in the coal these days, but it destroyed my stove." No wood ever went missing again. Yo, if you're gonna steal from someone who uses firewood, you at least know who you're stealing from, because if they're using firewood, they probably are ruthless and hardcore, because that means they live on the lam and they have to be ruthless. On the lam, off the lam, you get what I'm saying. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode.